definition about the legal reason for eminent domain, it needing public use with public necessity, and just compensation and due process. Like, to begin with, it becomes a matter of public use and necessity versus protecting the environment. And us as public, are we going to use it? Catering to the elite group of millionaires for a few months a year over protecting sustainable drinking water for our city. Cutting forested wetlands can have a major ecological impact. Loss of wetlands leads to increased risk from floods and droughts because it works as a sponge to protect our city. It diminishes the water quality and increased pollutant concentrations, also causing a decline in habit types and community structures in various animals, plants, and wildlife, impacting the biodiversity of these wetlands, in turn affecting our community. This is an environmental issue as well as a question of a constitutional legality. I'm here to remind you about the protected wetlands and reservoir, which provides the entire city of Oneonta with our water supply and also protects Oneonta from drought and flooding. I'm here to remind you of how necessary it is to protect these ecosystems and to provide safe water supply for our families, friends, fellow residents, college students, and tourists. The consequences of an unjustified and unnecessary expansion of the airport will cost us more than just what you will see right now in the long run. Thank you
very much. Appreciate it. And have we anybody else who'd like to speak? Okay, well, thank you very much again, folks, for your attendance and your engagement. I want to move from this juncture to a presentation from a couple of folks from, oh, I'm sorry, do we have correspondence?
I have that.
No. From Passero. Very good to have you guys here, Shannon and Matt. And so if you could provide us, the council, a bit of a presentation, and then afterward, the council will, I'm sure, have questions.
Sure. All right, well, first of all, thank you everyone for inviting us here to provide a little bit more clarity and information on the project. What we've attempted to do is go back and really try to define what the timeline of the project was, because it goes way beyond my time here and probably many others. So we've got a pile of handouts, and I've got some talking points, and we'll make reference to each of those handouts, and then if there's any specific questions, we can jump back to any individual thing that was mentioned and take it from there. So Passero's approved scope of work only addresses current airport conditions as it relates to known obstructions in the airport runway approaches. No future airport expansion is being considered as part of this initiative. This project is a public safety initiative. All federally funded projects must follow a defined process to ensure compliance with applicable rules, regulations, and guidance, as well as meet eligibility requirements for funding. So just as reference, the first two in the pile of handouts is the letter that we sent to the landowners, and then the second was an email that was referenced as a letter. So just so that everyone has that. So this type of project is really a 6-step FAA process. First step being any project to move forward needs to be shown on the ACIP, the Airport Capital Improvement Plan. I got back as far as 9 years. August 16th, 2016, this project was shown on the ACIP. It may have been shown further, but that's as far back as I got. And that is the third attachment. The second step is a master plan update. So it was on the ACIP. The FAA said you need to do a master plan update. And basically, that happened it was finalized July 20th, 2020, which is about 5 years ago. The plan identified and mapped areas of obstructions to the existing Part 77 surfaces. These are imaginary surfaces established by the FAA as object-free areas in relation to the runway's landing and departure protected zones. Approach surfaces as per Title 14, Code of Federal Regulations, CFR, Part 77, safe, efficient use and preservation of the navigable airspace. The plan identified Part 77 obstructions in the designated object-free areas. Look back at some of the budget information for the city itself. From the 2021 budget, which was published December 1st, 2020, approximately 5 years ago, the easement acquisition project was shown on that plan. That's, I believe, oh, I'm sorry, I skipped one of the documents, the attachments, or the maps that were created under the master plan update. I believe everyone's seen those, but I just want to provide a reference. And then the next one is the city capital improvement plan, which shows that project. The third step of the process is basically the environmental aspect of it. So the planning has been complete, now we're on to the environmental. And these were all done by a previous consultant. So an environmental assessment was completed, which is required by National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA. That was finalized January 13th, 2022, approximately 3.5 years ago. That project analyzed potential environmental impacts from proposed obstruction removal initiatives. There was a public involvement meeting with landowners, February 10th, 2020. There was a public notice and public comment period it was posted May 22nd, 2021 for 39 days. I believe 30 days is the minimum. No public comments were received. Throughout the NEPA review process, the airport and the FAA sought input in writing from the public and federal, tribal, state, and local agencies. This EA is basically the guideline for this project, and it defines the scope of work for the easement acquisitions. It provided approvals and justification for FAA funding of the easements, as well as future removal, design, and construction. So those were the next attachments, were basically references, highlighted sections of that EA, which references the public meetings, references the scope of work, gets into some environmental aspects of the project. There's a lot more information in the EA, but those sections kind of stood out to me as kind of the real guidance to the project. So as required by the FAA, the city retained Passero Associates as the airport consultant in November 2023. So that's when I stepped in. Common Council resolution was approved on April 15th, 2025. Won't read the entire thing, but whereas the FAA requires completion of a multi-step process to remain eligible for AIP funds with an initial easement acquisition phase, including landowner engagement, surveys and appraisals, negotiation and offer, and grant application. On June 30th, 2025, the FAA approved the scope of the reimbursable easement acquisition work. Following the FAA rules and guidance and details from the environmental assessment, Passero was hired by the city to negotiate offers to purchase navigation easements, air rights from off-airport landowners. If negotiations can be finalized, the city would be reimbursed for easement acquisition costs and money for purchase of easements through a reimbursable FAA grant. So that brings us, basically, we're in step 4, which is the easement acquisition purchase negotiation phase. If this phase is complete with negotiated easements in place, the FAA would provide a separate grant for obstruction removal, design, and bidding. That would get us to the 5th step, which would be obstruction removal, design, and bidding. Once that phase is complete, the FAA would provide a separate grant for obstruction removal, construction. That would bring us to the final phase, 6, which is the actual construction, removal of the obstructions. That's kind of the gist of the timeline. There's a lot of information to kind of organize, and But I hope that provides a little bit of clarity as to how we got to today. If anyone has any questions?
Shannon, were you also
Oh,
presenting?
I have a comment.
I've got this, Shannon, so go ahead.
Hi,
Hi.
I'm Shannon. So you say that there were no responses received, but I saw documentation where people were reaching out to you, trying to connect with you about the issues, because you said there weren't any responses received. So,
That was during the public comment period for the environmental assessment, which was completed by a different consultant.
so the other consultant didn't get the responses, is that what you're saying? Or it was previous to you, so you didn't see anything?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
In the final EA, it said, there's a copy of the posting in the paper.
Right.
There's a period of time when it was made publicly available, and no comments were received.
Okay. So in the April 15th vote, we basically were agreeing, right, to what had been set forth before us, which was that we were trying to figure out how we're going about possibly getting this grant and exploring this funding, right? At no point did we talk about like eminent domain. At no point were we pressing, taking people's properties, right? So when you show up and your first communication with people is that you're gonna take, there's air rights and all this stuff, and then this other follow-up email, which I've seen, because people have given me this prior. This whole thing, all these are about how we're gonna take your property, right? And you're trying to
Can you
connect
read
with-
the exact verbiage, just so the
So-
public hears what we wrote?
The first paragraph, acquisition to obtain air rights in order to access property and remove which is what we were looking for, right, to remove the obstructions. It doesn't talk about us paying them for their trees, which is what we were told initially, right? That's what was sold to us, that we were gonna say, hey, you've got trees in the way, right? We can just declare them as an obstruction, right? But instead, let's try to clean them up and we'll pay you for your tree. That's not what's happening in these letters, though. What's happening in these letters is that you're basically like outlining how we can take their stuff from them.
Do you
I'll
wanna
step
speak
in.
to that?
Yeah, that's fine. So we can't take any trees, we as the city, without an easement to their property, unless the property owners agree out of the goodness of their heart to trim a tree so an airplane doesn't hit it. So if you read the letter, it's just talking about how we're starting the process, and then the second email was a clarification to the FAA guidelines and process and a summary of it. That was it. There's no acquisition of land, no houses being demolished, no talk about that. It was air rights. That's it.
But you're talking about like we're gonna come in, we're gonna do appraisal, surveyors, they're gonna agree to a settlement, and if it's unsuccessful, the acquisition will be that, we will go ahead and do eminent domain authority.
That's not exactly what
That's
the
what
letter
it
says,
says,
but.
It's what it says.
You can read the whole thing, but that was a
But
summary of the
this
FAA's
is you
guidelines.
reaching out to our community on our behalf, and these are your first two ways to reach out.
I wanna shore up that,
Yeah.
again, this is, everything in the FAA world, airport world, government-funded world is a process. If you don't follow it to a T, you jeopardize everything, including
Understand.
reimbursement of the city's money. We followed a process, we were trying to be clear, so we directly reference, hey, this is the process that we're following. It's not the Wild West, we're not making things up. We are following a process, and if we do not, I'm jeopardizing my client's funding.
Okay, so you're looking at it from, this is what the FFA wants.
It's a
And
process.
what they're looking for. And so our suggestion that you be friendly and approach people kindly was just looked over because FFA requires those.
I apologize if it was taken that way, but we were trying to be as transparent as possible. And the initial letter referenced the FAA guidance and documents as well, the same reference that I guess we shouldn't have directly pulled for them to provide more clarity as to what the process is.
How would you feel if your first two communications from somebody was, we might eminent domain your property?
I don't think the first
Yeah.
letter
This is
was
the first
threatening.
letter you sent out, right?
That's correct.
Well,
And then this is the second? A month later?
That was an email that went to all of the landowners, yes. Again, trying to provide additional information as to the process we're following that the city of Oneonta hired me to follow.
Which was?
The FAA guidance on easement acquisitions.
Because none of us, because as a council, we have to vote on eminent domain. And there was not an utterance of eminent domain.
No one has suggested.
We're nowhere near that.
It's in this email.
Just part of the FAA process that was noted in there. Can I read the email? And, I mean, I'd be glad to read what I wrote, so.
I'm gonna let someone else speak. Does anyone else have questions?
Shannon, go ahead, please.
Is that okay? Okay. I'm Shannon Fisher, so I wrote these letters. I work with Pastor Associates. I've been in aviation for over 20 years. Not just on this side, I've been an airport manager as well. That's the second one that came out.
Is that the email?
That's the email, but I was gonna read the first. Yep, I have it right here, sorry. But I was just gonna tell you my background a little bit, so you knew who I was. I was an airport manager in Chautauqua County for the last 3 years. Was hired on to Passero. This is aviation, it's kind of a passion of mine. We were doing a similar project in Chautauqua County, and I like to think that I honestly pride myself on professionalism and will kind of defend myself a little bit because I have seen some of these public meetings. So I'd just like to read the letters that I wrote, and I think the property owners that I did speak with, I never thought we had a rude conversation with, so I just want to clarify that. The first initial letter that I wrote was, "Dear Mr. and Mrs. and whoever the landowner was, the city of Oneonta is responsible for maintaining the safety of the airspace surrounding the Albert S. Nader Regional Oneonta Airport. The Airport Commission met with several property owners to introduce the upcoming land aviation easement acquisition project. As you may already know, the Federal Aviation Administration has identified existing tree obstructions to the airspace on several properties within the approaches to each of the airport's runway ends. The city has engaged Passero Associates to assist with acquiring the necessary easements for air rights, which will include access to your property to remove obstructions and maintain tree obstructions in the future, to protect the approaches and departures into each end of the runway. As part of the process, on behalf of the city, we are requesting permission to access your property to complete the necessary surveying, environmental site assessment, and appraisal work. These visits will be scheduled in advance and at your convenience. There is no cost to you for this work. While there are obstructions to airspace noted on your property, any actual tree removal will be fully coordinated with you, the property owner, in advance after the acquisition is complete and under the separate project. That work will also be funded by the FAA and city at no cost to you, the landowner. Future tree removal projects may include restoration of disturbed ground. Please contact myself. I gave you my direct number, email, phone number. Can contact me for future correspondence. I had called and contacted the property owners after the fact. We had good conversations with the folks who did respond. And I explained the process a little bit further. It seemed like we still had a lot of questions, so we were asked to follow up on that a little bit, and we followed up with an email. I said, "Good morning. As a follow-up to many of our recent conversations, we wanted to ensure that everyone had a more detailed understanding of the current obstruction project at the Oneonta Airport. As a preface to the obstruction project, land easement acquisition is necessary to obtain air rights in order to access the property to remove obstructions. In this case, the obstructions are trees, and we are seeking mainly easements for air rights to clear the obstructions in order to provide safe airspace for our pilots and ensure that no accidents happen due to the obstructions on your property. We have condensed the FAA's land checklist to help outline the steps in the project. At this time, we are looking to initiate the surveyors and appraisers to enter your property. Thank you to those who have reached out and let us know that we may do so already." So at the time, there were folks who were on board with doing that. And then I bulleted, identify the affected property owners. These are the steps of the process directly from the FAA website. Prepare surveys and plats for proposed property acquisition. Order title search. Select and perform qualified appraiser and review appraiser. Submit to FAA for review. Complete an environmental site assessment, ESA, to ensure no contamination of the property. Based on the appraisals, a written offer of just compensation will be given to the property owner to initiate negotiations. Negotiate purchase agreement. If reasonable, attempts to negotiate an agreement or acceptable settlement are unsuccessful, the acquisition may be referred to the sponsor's attorney for condemnation under the airport's eminent domain authority. That portion was in quotes and is directly from the FAA's website. Closing court award. Title conveyance and schedule of possession of acquired property, in our case easements. Next steps, clear obstructions. Furthermore, please find additional FAA guidance for the land acquisition process at public airports for you to use as a resource. A link directly to the FAA's compliance website. The FAA mentions that each project is unique. It absolutely is. Your easement acquisitions may be very different than your neighbors. Some may be affected more than others. Ultimately, we are here to help the process go smoothly and fairly and assist in keeping everyone safe in the air and on the ground.
Thank you, Shannon.
You're welcome.
Katie.
Okay. Okay, so I can see how you were trying to use very direct and official language, and I think that if I was someone who was reading that letter that seemed pretty pleasant and then sort of said, we may condemn and take your property in layman's terms, like my mood shifted when you said that out loud. And so I can definitely imagine, you know, when I'm looking at some of these parcels, it's like this one here, it's like the entire parcel almost. So you can see how that would be like intimidating if this is your home and your land. Just from reading a letter, right? But I think I would like to understand practically, if you could walk me through, like I am an adjacent property owner, not the letter, but what is the practical application of this process? What does it look like if I am someone whose parcel is, I mean, even if it's just a few trees, but if it's like my whole property, like what does it mean, right, in layman's terms, for the airport to have a land acquisition easement of 97% of my property? I still own it, I still pay taxes on it, but the airport gets to decide how I maintain it. Is that sort of the gist? So, okay, so I want to understand,
Right.
so that's
Yeah.
my.
And just so you know, that when we wrote the initial letter, we had several property owners reach out, and we had great conversations about this as well. But the easement is for air rights, so not anything below the approach surface. It'd just be if a tree were penetrating the surface. So coming in and purchasing an easement is only from here and up. The reason that anyone's even mentioning removing a tree would be because the FAA pays for this one time. This, has been explained, but when they're removing the tree, at this point, we know that trees still grow, right? So the city then would be on the hook in the future, if you own that easement, to clear those on an annual basis or whenever they penetrate that surface again.
Okay.
So even discussion of a tree removal was because, taking it down to the ground, and you don't want to leave the property owners with something that looks, like half a tree or even a tree that would die. No one's looking to do that. So you would negotiate. That's when you get to that point where you negotiate how you leave the tree or what portion of the tree is cleared. But we can't get to that point, of negotiation until the first part, the appraisers, the surveyors, the environmental site assessment, all that preliminary work that was approved to move forward with. And then you get into negotiations, and then you try to work, obviously from the city and the property owners, the best you can to come to an agreement on how they would, best like that and how works best for the airport. So.
Okay, thank you for explaining that.
Yep.
So some of these properties that are like completely orange, presumably it's like all of their trees are in, and I'm doing my best to like take these maps in as quickly as possible, but it's almost all the trees that are there that would be within the obstruction area. And so I'm assuming, based on the shape of this kind of orange zone here, that these are things that need to be really like taken down and maybe not even be replaced
don't know yet. They're just penetrations to the surface that not we, but FAA has identified some. And this was what was identified in the EA, which was done a few years ago, so likely they've penetrated higher. So the next portion after the easement process would be to identify which trees would be specifically penetrating the surface and be removed or trimmed to that surface.
Essentially, every property would be its own little project that
Right.
you would hone in and look at the types of trees, the heights of the penetration, what's gonna happen if you top it, is the tree gonna die next year?
Okay.
Is it better to take it to the ground, is it gonna continue to grow at 2.5 feet per year, to be a problem again?
Mhm.
Not only for the city, for cost, effort, but also, just going in and getting on people's property in another 2 years from now, and environmental impacts to their privacy, and
So, following up on that, I know you just said that each property would sort of be its own project, but do you have an idea of approximately how many trees total we're looking at?
not exactly, and as part of the design portion of the project, we would get updated imagery that tells us exactly what's going on, because the imagery we're going off of is approximately 3 years old.
Okay.
We all know it's not better unless a tree died and fell out of the surface, but
Right.
we would get more accurate information and again, hone in specifically.
Is that what we see here, all these numbers, these are trees?
Yes.
And they're identified as obstructions, so we can kind of guess.
Yeah, and if
I
you
just don't know
look-
off the top of my head, but yeah, in those charts, you would get an idea of
Okay.
approximately how many trees.
Okay, and then, there are like 700 trees that are numbered. So I'm just thinking if, some of these properties are within, the zone and the bulk of their property is mapped here, that, it's possible that the entire character of their property could change based on this project, because if it's within the air rights and it needs to be brought down to the ground and your property is currently covered in trees and now can no longer be, that's like a really big change, and I think that that's really difficult for a lot of people to swallow, myself included. I don't even live there, but seeing that happen to someone, my neighbor, clear cut the side of one tree, and it changed the light in my house so much that for a month I was really distraught about it. So if every tree on my property was cut down, I think I would be pretty upset too. Okay, well, thank you so much for answering my questions.
I'd like to add to that just a little bit if you don't mind. So we definitely understand that and take that into consideration. And in a lot of projects, they don't even do, with the appraisals come in, the appraisers, they look at land only, right? In this project, the appraisers reached out to the property owners because they would like to identify just that. They want to make sure that when a tree is falling, they want to see from the inside of their house to see what would be changed from this, and then take that into consideration with the offers that would come out. So that was part of the appraisal process.
Can I just make sure I understand what you're saying? So if the nature of their property was changed so much from inside their property, the appraisal would be higher based on that?
Yes.
Based on changing the character of their property? Okay.
Let me go to Cecilia, please.
I just had a quick question, and this may be, again, something that, is not able to be answered at this moment given the lack of data, but I was just curious in terms of any of the landowners that you spoke to, or in any of the sort of negotiations and discussions you've had about this project, if there'd been anything around finding a solution to the possible replacement of trees. So has there been any discussion about, okay, if this tree is too high, there'd be a possibility to plant a different kind of tree that wouldn't be as high, that there would be different pathways to kind of recreating a tree property, or a property that has lots of trees, but that those pathways may include just different types of trees rather than the current
And
configuration.
I can speak to that too, because I did talk to several of the property owners, and what I did say is that the FAA does not reimburse for those in-kind trees anymore, but what we've done at other airports is worked out something in that negotiation or with the city to put in something that's below the surface or won't grow past, 10 feet or something that would, go back in place of that. But that's something that would come in the negotiation phase. So, but that is not part of your reimbursement, from the FAA. They don't do that anymore. They used to.
So just to follow up with a quick question, so any sort of discussion about replacement trees would have to come from the city? That would be something that we would
I
have
think
to
we should
discuss?
try to put it in there. I mean, I don't know, you wanna add to that?
So,
They don't.
we'll absolutely try with the
Yeah.
FAA, but as Shannon alluded to, I don't know how many years ago, that was more commonplace. They've kind of backed down from that. It doesn't mean it's not an option, but I'm not in a position to present it as an option at this point in time. And I think Mark had mentioned something about potential fund.
Yes, I don't know that I'm prepared to address the council with that in terms of
Okay, I
the
didn't mean to throw
specifics.
you under the bus.
October 7th, we'll have a conversation with council around a few different things, but yes. Don?
When it comes to easements, what kind of an impact does that have on individual property values? So if you have an easement, and the FAA has an easement, and you go to sell your property, that would be a negative, wouldn't it?
Yes, potentially, but at that point in time, you're selling what your property is. It may not be 80-foot trees, but it's lower growing trees, maybe it's an apple orchard, maybe it's grassland, whatever the case is, that's gonna be the value of your property at that point in time. The restriction is that if a tree does grow up in the future and you're the new owner, now.
That's not my question. The question is if your property is worth $200,000 today, and after you grant the FAA an easement, doesn't that reduce the value of your property?
So, and that is why they do appraisals, to compensate you for that difference, so you're getting paid for your property.
Okay. One other question. When it comes, if you're involved in a negotiation with the property owner, is the negotiation only focused on the compensation, or can you negotiate what's done to your property?
You can absolutely negotiate what's done to your property. It's just up to the city then, on what's decided and also what the FAA will reimburse. So it's a negotiation between everyone.
Thank you.
Further questions from Council Shannon?
So you mentioned in here that the visits will be scheduled, right, for the appraisers and the surveyors. Did you find that was the case? Because I kind of heard differently.
I didn't
The
exactly.
scheduling of the appraisers. So we were only told by one property owner that we needed to give advance notice at the time. So we let our subs go. Would we have liked to probably give everyone notice? Yes, I will. I was not a fan of the surveyors just going out. Let's be completely honest. That we found out the morning that they went out there. But we were only told by one property owner at the time that they needed a 7 to 10 day notice, and we did let them know in advance of that.
Because it says you're requesting permission to access the property, but
Mhm.
it was more than once. There's video, so they're just people showing up willy-nilly on people's property, and so.
Right, and we sent so they had the opportunity to respond to us in that both letters. I reached out also and left messages, and so, I mean, if they didn't respond, everyone got a certified letter in the mail stating that we needed permission for them to be on the property, this was the next step. We had one who responded to us and asked us to give them 7 to 10 days notice. After this, we were called by all property owners and told that no one's allowed on my property, so that's.
So you say you're gonna request permission, they show up randomly, then you send out notification saying, hey, sorry that happened. If you don't want them, please message us, and you're saying you're from one person.
No, we sent out the initial contact that said the next steps were appraisers, surveyors, the letter that I read
Yes.
to start with. Everyone got a certified letter, and we had one response to that letter. We then went out, I say we as this is a whole, but got information from each property owner, I believe. Someone went and got their contact information. We ended up calling and contacting everyone. that we possibly could. And we had good conversations with everyone. Everyone seemed receptive that I did talk to. And then, yes, the surveyors then went out one day, but we only had one person say that they needed notice.
Right, didn't an assessor or surveyor get yelled off property?
Yeah, not by someone who told us they could not be there until after that happened.
Right, because you said you're gonna be requesting permission.
We
and
did,
then-
that was us, that we did
And then you
request
changed
permission.
it. So, my question though is, I'm sorry.
Let's
My question-
not be casting aspersions, let's just ask
I'm literally
respectful
quoting
questions,
from the
please.
letters.
Please.
I'm literally just quoting the letters. That's it. She gave them to us, right? That's all I'm going from. Okay. So, I don't even understand why it was gavelled. Why was that gavelled?
Respectful questions, please.
How did I not? Okay. So, my question to you is kind of how did this escalate, right? How did this go from we are going to meet everybody, we're going to get everyone on board, we're going to look at trees to buy, we've got under, I think the first number was 20, and then they said what, it was under 100 or something, and then it was thousands. And then it escalated to clear cutting and eminent domain. So I'm very curious.
I think Shannon provided a lot of the explanation as to what our approach was. We did hold an in-person meeting at the airport. One resident showed up. I'm not going to try to quote what was said, but there was multiple people there besides this person. Seemed that they understood the project, seemed that they're on board with it, not necessarily loving it. Said, make sure you give me notice, 7 to 10 days notice for your sub-consultants, but I'll cooperate with you. So we continue to make contact through emails, letters, phone calls with all the landowners so that we could open up the lines of communication and provide as much information as possible to keep everyone informed. We reached out to that landowner to request permission, schedule a surveyor, responded back and said, no, you have no permission. And then his attorney sent me a letter and said, I want nothing to do with this project, whether current conditions or future conditions. And then every landowner said that every phone call that we made, we were rude. That's where it ended.
So eventually there was an issue with all the landowners, because I was just about to ask you, you keep saying that there were so many people it was going great with, there's not that many of them. So who was it going great with?
I would prefer not to make
Okay,
reference
could
to
that
any
be
names.
something that you emailed to us, so we have insight?
We have full documentation of correspondence with every landowner.
Okay,
And it shows at what point in time they sort of dropped out of the conversation.
so how many people are currently in conversation and in agreement with what's happening?
We stopped corresponding when
Once the attorney said, don't talk to me or us, we just kind of put the brakes on a little bit, and that's part of the reason we're here today, to provide more clarity.
Further questions? Lynn?
So Shannon, thank you very much for coming tonight and standing behind your letters. This is the first time I've met you. I think for clarity, Matt, you didn't really introduce yourself. If you want to take a moment to do that to the council, that'd be
Oh,
great.
I apologize, I got ahead of myself. I'm Matt Nissen with Passroad Associates, I'm a project manager.
So Matt or Shannon, what I'd like to reference is this document that you gave us tonight. This is the first time I'm seeing this. So a point cloud data, according to AI, is saying that it's a three-dimensional, using data points in a three-dimensional space where each point has specific coordinates. And it's created using high-tech tools like 3D scanner, LiDAR, and photogrammetry. Which one did you guys use, and how long ago did you use that to make this document?
On that example, I didn't get the details, I just said to my guy, can you give me an example? It wasn't even the best example, I'd rather have one a little bit crisper and cleaner, but probably a month ago was the last. We have drones with LiDAR technology, and basically we could fly the approaches. Like you said, it creates a 3D model of terrain as well as actual trees and the tops of the trees. and then you model that surface, which in there you can see is transparent to a certain extent. You could zoom around and really see, looking at the side of that surface, what the issue is and how big that group of top of the tree is.
Is that all part of our contract with you?
It is not, because as part of this, we don't need updated imagery. We're going off of what was in the EA. The FAA is not willing to reimburse for updated at this point in time. When we move into the design phase, they would pay for that. So what I was gonna offer at the end is, I've given a proposal to the city to provide that service. Again, not necessarily for me, just so everyone has the most accurate, up-to-date information with a lot better visuals that hopefully it's more realistic for not only you and me and landowners, but the general public. Some of the images from the EA can be a little bit challenging to understand.
It's definitely challenging to understand. Obviously, I've been associated with the airport for a long time, and I've seen this before, but the way it was explained to me by the previous engineer was different than what you guys are explaining to me. But why don't, I guess we need to have a conversation with the FAA about supporting financially the LiDAR technology, because obviously this is having a negative effect by, I don't blame you, if that's the FAA process and you listed it out, but to my colleagues and to the folks that are in the gallery, it's misleading and it raises the emotional temperature in the room. But if the technology is there, if LiDAR is accessible, and it sounds like it is, the fact that you have the ability to pinpoint each tree and give us clarity, it seems like that would be more beneficial to anybody that has to sit on this side of the dais. So I'm curious to see what your proposal is. I'm glad that you guys came tonight. Hopefully everybody's questions are being answered. But what is the next step? If the homeowners or landowners are not being cooperative, what is the next step? Is it only this technology?
So that technology is an option for the city if they want more updated, more clear graphics for discussion moving forward.
But you haven't made access onto the property, right? So you don't even know at this point what trees, without using this technology, we don't have the ability to move forward to even have a reasonable conversation with any of the landowners. I can't go to Randy and look him in the eye and say, well, Randy, 25 of your trees are coming down and we'll replace them. We can't have that conversation because we really don't know. Is it 25 or is it 250 trees, right? Is that really where we're at?
And that's what happens in the design phase of the
Right.
project, but before that, even we need to get through the easement steps.
We've got to have accountability, right? We got to know approximately how many trees we're dealing with. I mean, how would you ever go to the landowner and say, okay, I'm going to come onto your property, which at this point, I'll be honest with you, I don't even understand why we'd go on the property if the technology's already out there to bypass that and tell us exactly what's going on. And also, is there other technology that bypasses the 34:1 scope? Is there other technology that helps aircraft understand where those obstructions are and brings a different glide scope?
I don't believe so.
Okay. Thank you.
Don?
When we were talking about easements and the impact on property values, I wanted to follow up on that. So it seems to me you were saying that in a negotiation, the FAA would take into account the future value of the property. Is that what we said? How could that be possible?
They would take in.
Because nobody knows what market conditions will change. There's no way of predicting or estimating what someone's property would be valued at today as it stands, and in the future after the easement. No matter how many trees are taken down, just the fact that there's an easement would reduce the value of the property.
I don't know that for sure. I just know the process of how they value the property. They they would take it as a whole, what it's worth at that time. They pay you for the difference of what the value of the property is and what they offer, up for what the easement is worth.
But how do
And
they
then-
know that?
Right.
How do they know that? There's no way to do it unless they put it on the market and sell it.
I would say I'm not an appraiser, so I can't answer that, but we hire qualified appraisers and review appraisers who are well-versed in these exact types of easements at airports, and they're following, I don't know what the reference is, but
Uniform, yeah.
Uniform Act, which is required by the FAA. If we didn't follow that Uniform Act, we're jeopardizing this whole process and reimbursement.
So there's two appraisers, the appraiser and then the review appraiser to make sure that those are fair market value.
Okay. Shannon?
Two things. If someone were to show up at my house right now and say, hey, we're gonna appraise this, and then we're gonna give you a fraction of the cost, too much work my place needs, like, this is like, and to have somebody just come in and appraise my life all of a sudden and decide what it's worth just seems insane. And then, you know, we could be like, hey, you've got this wrong or that wrong or whatever wrong, or this isn't up to date, and then now we are offering them less, even less, for using their property. But I'm just saying, the roads, I don't see the roads in here, am I not seeing it? Because 2 roads need to be moved, correct? To make this longer on both ends?
No one is proposing a runway expansion or extension. This is only air rights for the trees that are penetrating the
What is
surface.
the extension for?
There's no discussion of that right now.
Oh, okay, sorry, my bad, thank you.
Actually, you know, thank you for clarifying, you know, what the project does, cover. I wanted to, I wanted to see if you could explain a little bit about, you know, what the city's obligations are related to those FAA requirements, based on, you know, previous decisions that have been made, you know, with the airport. I know that that's something that we've looked at, you know, with, previous FAA grants that have been received, and we've even received grants as, recent as this year. So how does that impact, you know, the city's obligations, you know, with the airport specifically?
So the reference of the Part 77 is it's one of the grant assurances. Every time the federal grant is accepted, you sign off on a bunch of assurances. It basically says that you will keep these services to the best of your ability, clear and safe and navigable. I'm not an attorney, I'm not an FAA representative, so I don't want to go much further than that, but
That's fine. I was wondering, because I know the other big concern is the environmental impact, and I saw that there was some information in here, and we had some communication from our environmental committee as well. So I was wondering if you could speak to those environmental studies that were in here as well.
sure. So again, the reference, the one kind of heavily highlighted pages from the EA, that gets into basically all environmental aspects that need to be considered. Again, I didn't prepare that document, but it seemed pretty logical to me in the approach. When it comes to any permits or agency approvals, again, every single property / sub-project, is the larger project, would be, you know, coordinated with all agencies and whatever needs to happen to make sure that we're not degrading the environment. We absolutely would do, just like we do on every other project we work on.
So I think that was some of the specific
Oh, I'm sorry.
questions. Oh, I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead.
I was just saying, I think that was some of the specific questions about the permits, and different things, so, okay.
Yeah, and I mean,
That gets
the
to-
wetlands as mapped right now, there is no tree removal in the wetlands.
No, okay.
So there's no need to actually go in a wetland.
So in the environmentally protected spaces, you wouldn't be touching, like, people who have environmentally protected land, you wouldn't be touching their properties?
We need my environmentally
Don't we
protected.
have to censure environmentally protected?
Yeah, there's a 17-acre wetland reserve program that's a federal conservation easement in perpetuity for migratory birds.
Yep, that's correct. We're in coordination with the USDA. We've had a few meetings with them already, and the conversation is ongoing at this point because it's obviously 2 different federal easements. So that's what I can update now. We're not ignoring it by any means.
Okay.
It's been very helpful.
All right, yes, thank you very much, folks. Unless there are additional questions from council.
I just got.
Yes, Scott, go ahead.
Can you elaborate on air rights? You said it a lot, and I would like to be a little bit more rehearsed on how far air rights go. Is it
Sure.
from here to the moon? Is it from here to just a certain?
So it's gonna change at any given point. So off of the runway end, it's going at a certain slope and it's got a shape to it. So that's when you look at a map from, you know, like an aerial perspective, it's gonna show you how that surface goes over any given piece of property. So then underneath that, that surface has an elevation based on the elevation at the end of the runway and the slope that that surface is going up at. So obviously it's increasing in elevation. Depending on what the terrain is doing at any given point in time, like if the terrain drops off, which it does, the further you get out on the approach, it's not a problem because you've got 200 feet before anything would penetrate. So it really depends on any piece of property. There's gonna be different height restrictions till you get up to, they call that imaginary surface.
Did you want to use this as an example, so he understands what you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, looking at it from a profile view, so that line right there, anything that's above that line shouldn't be there because aircraft are flying in and that tree is in the approach path.
Right, I understand. Who owns the air rights? Is it the landowner owns the air rights? Is it the FAA that owns the air rights?
It's an easement, I believe, I hope I don't misspeak, it's an easement with the city who is the owner of the airport. The FAA just supports it and funds the project. And it's just putting a restriction on that airspace that you can't build a tower there, you can't build a skyscraper because it's restricted airspace protected.
So Dave, it'd be the FAA, right? Am I understand
No.
that?
No, the city would own the easement. The city owns and operates the airport. The FAA simply authorizes us to do that. So the city would own the air rights so that the landowner could not, as he was just saying, he couldn't build a tower on the land because there's a height limit. The zoning is still whatever the zoning is in the town of Hoyana or Lawrence or wherever it is that the property is, but we would own the air rights at that slant up until the point where it's no longer controlled.
It's strictly a height.
All right, so if I'm
restriction.
coming off on like a 45 degree, as long as that, when it goes like this, I start owning whatever.
You want everything
Okay.
above the property owner.
I get it now.
Below
All right.
But if they
I
build,
do
they can build something below it.
Right, pretty much anything could happen below that. You could build, you could grow.
Shannon, please.
Still subject to the zoning of the
Right.
town.
Correct.
Right. Shannon, please.
Out of curiosity, so like say we have like JFK or like Newark or like, you know, any other airport. How would we, like, how do they go about if there is a tower or a building or something or a crane or something that is in the way of like them coming in and out of the airport? What happens then?
If there's an easement in place or if there's.
Yeah.
So
Like, how do larger airports
How-
navigate
what needs-
obstructions
what
that
happens then?
cannot be removed?
Well,
like
there's a couple
trees?
things, within, I don't remember the exact distance, within thousands of feet around any airport, you're supposed to file what's called a 7460-1, which is for cranes or any permanent structures, and that's a review that goes through the FAA and multiple lines of business at the FAA, for them to say, no, that's in our flight path, you can't build that. If someone did build it, I suppose maybe they could be forced to remove it from the flight path. I don't know, I've never been in that situation, but.
You can't fly drones above a certain height without FAA permission. You can't shoot model rockets over 1,000 feet without FAA permission. You can't fly a helicopter in airspace without FAA rules and regulations. You can't build a tower to the sky without getting permits to do that above a certain height. So if that answers your question, I'm not sure.
But there's places that have to declare, right, that they are in the path,
Like
right?
existing.
Existing, they would declare that they are in the path, correct? So, like, with our airport, right, there are properties that declare those trees that are in the way, right, that they are there and they are in the way, and when
We're
someone
making the
radios it.
determination.
Huh?
The FAA is making the determination that they're in the way.
Right, but like,
Because they've grown up above
right,
the slope going in.
but they're declared, right, so they're a known thing that's in the way. Right?
The problem is, again, I don't want to get into this too deeply, but on behalf of our engineers or the FAA, but trees grow.
Correct.
So, and different trees grow at different rates, and different patches of trees on different hillsides grow at different rates. So what they're saying is that there is tree growth that is currently blocking the access, the angle of access for planes that are coming in and taking off. And that changes every day that a tree continues to grow. So that's why they're talking about moving whatever trees are necessary in order to maintain the height that makes it safe for airplanes to approach and take off.
So we're currently out of compliance with safety for them?
That's not my area of expertise,
Okay.
that you talk to them, they're our engineers.
So are we out of compliance right now?
I'd say, yeah.
So if we're out of compliance, why are we running the airport?
I don't think that's a question that I should be answering.
Right.
Well, so my question kind of follows up on that, like, what are the penalties for not adhering to the 34-to-1 vertical thing?
So I think one of the first things is they'll stop providing grants if the city just decides to abandon the airport. I've never been there. Assume the city would get a pretty hefty bill to pay back.
Well, so that seems to always be like we just go from like point A to point Z. Like, we don't clear 34-to-1, so we've stopped operating the airport. There's nothing in between. Like, what I'm asking is,
You're still,
yeah, you're
you're still
picking up what I'm
flying, you're
putting
still
down.
utilizing the airport with visual approaches right now. You don't have night approaches, I don't believe at Oneonta right at the moment. Do you wanna talk to more of that, or are you good?
Yeah, no,
Yes, go ahead.
Come on up, Justin, he's the pilot here.
Thank you.
So flying airplanes is my area of expertise.
So Justin is the airport commissioner for those who,
And if anybody wants it, I'm happy to furnish anybody with it, but they have, we've talked about it a little bit, the document's called the grant assurances, and it talks about what they've been speaking about, of maintaining the airport, and it's the sponsor or the city's responsibility to maintain the airport. So they've identified, the FAA has essentially identified obstructions that are penetrating the airway. So what they have essentially done is they have, to put it simply, degraded the approach procedures into the airport. Now, so we're out of compliance in that right now, I believe it's item 20 in the grant assurances. It says that the sponsor will remove essentially all hazards, vegetation, and the flight path, is in a nutshell what it says. There's a long list of things in the grant assurances. It basically says this is how you shall operate your airport in accordance with FAA specifications.
Can I ask
So,
a quick
go ahead.
clarifying question? Is that for previous grants accepted or for future grant assurances?
All airport operations.
Okay.
And so here's the beauty of it, really. is that we have an airport. We're very fortunate to have an airport. We've talked about that, and we're not talking here about any expansion or anything like that. We're just talking about the aggravation easements and the tree removal. Expansion is a whole separate conversation, and I know that water's been muddy, but I want to make that crystal clear. We're just talking about the aggravation easements. The FAA, and as Matt mentioned, has identified obstructions. Now, when you think about it kind of logically, if the FAA comes in and they do a survey and they say, hey, you've got some obstructions in your flight path that need to come down, what's the realistic timeline for that? Well, no, but there's nothing published that says, well, you've got obstructions in the flight path, they need to come down in 30 days. So it's a little bit different than a tree over the sidewalk in that, but it kind of follows the same cadence. The process, as Passero is following, which we've hired them to do, is to follow the FAA guidance, and I know they've mentioned that, but I want to, follow up on that. There's a very specific process that is an FAA process, and what the FAA has said is they've said you have trees penetrating the airspace, you should hire an engineering firm to go through the process and get them taken down. So that's where we're at. there's a couple things that are unique to this project. One, we started with McFarland Johnson. Passero has taken on that project, so naturally, when you hand this project off, they're picking up with some work that they didn't do initially, so there's a little bit of, you know, playing catch up with that. Also, something that was kind of brought to my attention, and I just want to make mention of, we did hold, the commission held a neighbor night. I don't remember exactly when it was almost a year ago, and we invited the neighbors over, and we talked about it, and we didn't have a lot of specific information, and it's a criticism. The reason for that is really the FAA wants the easements in place first. That's part of the process. That's what Passero's working on. The reason that the FAA wants the easements in place first is because if we do all the design work without the easement, and maybe the landowners say, I don't like this, the FAA is out a bunch of money. You know, they just paid for hundreds of thousands probably of design work for nothing. So the process, as they're following, is to put the easements in place, do the engineering, get the imaging, and move forward in the process that they've outlined. The criticism of that I'm hearing is that the landowners don't want to talk about it because they don't have the engineering, they don't have the imaging, they don't really understand, so it's almost becomes kind of a chicken and egg. So it's something we're talking about as the commission, and also as the, you know, with the FAA, we're talking with Passero as to what we can do to try to facilitate this process, and that's going to involve stepping outside the scope of work. We've been sticking to a very strict script, a very strict scope of work. I feel that Passero is doing a great job. They've been very professional. And now we're at the point where we need to think about how we can get this project moving forward, and maybe stepping outside of the scope of work as far as what we can do with imaging, to your point, Len. And that it's just, it's the FAA script. They have, this is what they approve, and this is what we're working with. If we want to do something different, you know, to your point of, you know, why isn't this approved? The FAA is very slow to approve new things. GPS technology and you know, and car GPS has been around for a long time. They're finally getting, well, in the past, dare I say, 5 years, removing some regulations on GPS, whereas, believe it or not, in airplanes, if you had GPS, you had to have a second navigation source anyways. That's neither here nor there.
My question was about 34-1. What are the penalties for not clearing the offsite 34-1 obstructions? A lot of times when I say that, people go right to, then we close the airport. But
Well,
I'm wondering if there's something in between, especially because something you said resonated with me, which is that the FAA, and I'm going to paraphrase, doesn't want to outlay the money for design without the easements, because then it's for nothing. So it sounds like if this were the other way around, that there's a potential that not acquiring the easements is an option, and so that does seem to me that to signal that there's something in the middle ground.
Not necessarily, and the reason is, and I, you know, one of the things that I want to do as a commission, as everybody knows, you know, the commission, we've been, you know, kind of a little bit restrained on membership. We've had an ability to have a quorum. We finally got an email address. I sent out an email a couple weeks ago. I'm going to send out another email in the next few days to bring everybody up to speed on what we're working on. I'll attach the grant assurances to that. You know, it's an FAA document, it's a public document, and I will highlight the clause that you're looking for.
Okay.
And basically, what it says is, if you're not in compliance, and there may be fines, penalties. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, so don't hold me to it, but there may be consequences, and it doesn't stipulate what those are.
Okay. Are they boilerplate? Is this something I could Google?
Yeah, just Google FAA grant assurances. let's see, there was a question about declared obstructions.
Yes.
So that's not a thing. There are temporary cranes and things that can happen, but as Matt mentioned, there's a very specific process that they go through. And when you think about an airport like a Newark or a JFK, those are not actually penetrating that 34-to-1 surface. They are outside of it, but they may be published as an advisory. So maybe that may be what has been talked about, and what they call it is a NOTAM, which is Notice to Airmen. And if there are different hazards, things like bird activity around an airport is a common NOTAM. If there is a light out of service, because we haven't got around to changing the light bulb yet, that could be NOTAMed out of service. Or there could be cranes, obstructions, things of that nature. There are obstructions around airports, but they cannot, under any circumstances, penetrate that surface, the 34-to-1 approach surface. But they may be outside of it, they may be close to it, and I don't know exactly what the guidance is off the top of my head. I could look it up as far as to maybe they're within a X amount of miles or feet from the airport, and they publish and say, hey, there's a crane over here, exercise caution.
My point was that for our local airport, like for our specific local airport, I saw documentation that people were just declaring that their trees were in the way, and that was acceptable. Because we're still able to continue utilizing the airport. But I have another question besides that. How does one access air rights without property access?
That's part of it.
Exactly.
Let me go to Cecilia.
So I thank you for clarifying quite a bit. I just had a quick question about obstruction, just further context for the obstruction, and for understanding that. I'm just curious, it doesn't have anything to do necessarily with the type of plane that's being used or the size. It doesn't matter. That wouldn't
Correct.
matter. Okay. Just to clarify.
Yeah, all airplanes.
Katie, you had a question?
Thank you.
Katie?
I'm gonna hold it for now.
Okay. Scott?
Can I just, so you see I'm like ignorant when it comes to airports, I'll be honest with you. So you're saying 34-to-1 approach, is that the angle that they have to come in at? Is that what you're talking about, you say 34-to-1?
Essentially, yes. For roundabout number, it's about 3 degrees.
So could that be changed?
No.
It can't be changed?
No.
Because that affects how,
So the 34-to-1 is actually the floor. So
Okay,
another
so
thing
you're
to think
talking
about,
about- okay.
right, it's the floor of the surface, right? So we're actually, so we're coming in a little higher than that, but you know, I'd like to have a little bit of fudge factor when I'm flying my plane in. You know, I don't want to be coming at that 34-to-1 and dragging my wheels through the trees. I'd like, but so there's a lateral and a vertical, you know, kind of, for lack of a better term, fudge factor, where it's you have a little extra space around you. You know, similar to, you know, the lanes on I-88 are a couple feet wider than your car. Same idea.
okay.
But that is the floor, or you know, that's the yellow line on the side of the road, right? Or the guardrail.
Justin,
I understand that from watching Top Gun.
All right.
Floor to ceiling.
There you go.
Justin, we have, Katie, did you have something?
Yeah, so I was just reading through the airport sponsor assurances. This is updated in April of this year. I'm wondering if the clauses that you're referring to are the operation and maintenance and then hazard removal and mitigation clauses?
Those are 2 of them, yeah.
Okay, so, it says the airport and all facilities which are necessary to serve the aeronautical users of the airport, shall be operated at all times in safe and serviceable condition, which makes sense, in accordance with the minimum standards as may be required or prescribed by applicable federal, state, and local agencies for maintenance and operation. So my question is what we are doing the required for the minimum standard to operate the airport? And if not, could you define what the minimum standard for FAA operation is?
That can be a very deep question. So to answer that, the role of the FAA as a regulatory agency is to identify what the minimum standard of performance is for anything in the airports, airplanes, operators, et cetera. We want to operate at a level of safety which is above the minimum acceptable standard of safety.
we want to do that.
Of course, with everything we do. And the one that's in question right now is the 34-to-1 obstruction clearance surface. Does that answer your question?
Nope. Sorry.
Okay.
That's a
What is
great
the,
question.
what is the minimum, like, how does this relate to the minimum standard for vertical clearance?
You answer that better than I can, Matt, maybe?
I'll say the EA is the guidance moving forward, which specifically says Part 77, 34-to-1 approach. That's all I can go by. If I try to clear something different, I'm gonna jeopardize funding, reimbursement of funding. They have to follow that document.
Okay, so let me rephrase my question. Does the 34-to-1 clearance, I'm understanding that it does not expand the physical footprint of the airport. Does it expand the operational capacity of the airport?
No. It's the capacity that we're at now with a couple details. So we need the 34-to-1 obstruction clearance slope that we keep talking about. If we have penetrations, which we do, what the FAA will do is they will say, basically the area that we're operating in now is the timeline where they've said these need to be addressed, and we're addressing them. If we don't address them, we're not complying with the documents you have in front of you, and it's going to, and I can't speak for what will happen next.
But we still could be in compliance with the minimum standard, because we're not at the minimum standard. Is that a fair statement?
Not real, so.
Thank you for helping me understand. I appreciate it very much.
Yeah,
This is all
I'm trying to give you the best answer I can. We're operating where the hazards have been identified, they need to be mitigated, and we're in between those 2 points right now. If we were to choose not to mitigate them, we're not in compliance with that document, it's gonna be up to somebody else way above my pay grade as to what happens next.
And in line with that, it's like, that's this first letter, right? Like, we are going to go ahead and meet everybody and cut down a few trees and comp them for them. And then so I'm gonna ask you as well, how do we go from that plan, right, that we voted on in April? Because this was in June, that's what we voted on, that's what got fed to us and sold to us. How do we go to eminent domain and clear cutting?
Yeah, great question. And they've answered that from Passero's stance, I'll answer from the Airport Commission's stance. About a year ago, the Airport Commission invited everybody, we didn't have all the answers that they wanted, we spoke with the neighbors and we said that we'd like to collaborate. The Airport Commission stance is still to collaborate with the landowners and negotiate and facilitate a solution that works for everybody. We support Passero Associates. That communication that you have in front of you, number one, I consider that to be very professional communication. The Airport Commission has never said we're going to take your property via eminent domain to any of the landowners. The only time that I'm aware of that eminent domain has been used is in that email that you have in front of you, which is exactly from the FAA website. And if somebody was to do a Google search of an aggravation easement or how the process works with the FAA, it would take you exactly to that. So I don't see where there has been a threat of eminent domain, anybody saying we're going to come take your property via eminent domain. The communication from the Airport Commission has been, we want to collaborate with you, we want to work with you and come up with a solution.
And you bring up a fantastic point, kind of where I was going with this a little bit. So that, you know, if we do accept this funding and we go through with it, in the end, we will be held to FAA standards for this money that we've received to them, and ultimately they could come in and ask us to eminent domain people's property, correct?
No. No, that is
Well, no, I know we get to vote on it,
What they can.
but then we'll owe
FAA
them money if we don't.
Every time you take $1 from the FAA, at any time, whenever the money comes in, before they send you the money, the city signs a statement that said they will continue to operate the airport in full compliance with all FAA obligations for the next 20 years. Every time the city takes $1 from the FAA, they sign a statement that says that in exchange for us taking the money, we will continue to be obligated to keep the operation of the airport in compliance with the FAA for the next 20 years.
Right.
When was the last time we took money from the FAA?
Okay.
This year.
Justin? Go ahead.
So be aware that that's, and if FAA can penalize the city for not
Right.
being in
And that's where
compliance.
I'm going, thank you, Dave.
Sure.
That's where I'm going with this,
I'll make
is
sure
that we can
everybody
get
understands.
penalized, right? Like, this could fall all back in our lap, all this money that we've spent. Because as far as I know, we had a straw poll the other night where basically everybody wasn't certain about eminent domain and wasn't like feeling that that was a path they wanted to go down. So my question to you is, how do you make this happen, right? If that were the path, that eminent domain was not a thing and the FFA was asking you for it or requesting it or requiring it, and if we didn't do it, it would be in our laps.
So the FAA is not going to request that we use eminent domain. They're going to say, this is the standard, we need to go, nope. This is the standard and we need to comply with this standard, and it's up to the sponsor or the city of Oneonta to maintain that standard. And if we don't maintain that standard, there may be consequences. I can't speak to what those consequences are. It's in the grant assurances document, and it doesn't say exactly what it says, fines, penalties, et cetera, whatever it says.
Justin, if you don't mind. So earlier you had talked, you'd begun to reference thinking outside the scope a bit here, and one of the things that Len brought up, I think we've also had the conversation around. A number of us have had that conversation, and that is providing imaging that is more empirical, more clear in terms of how properties are being affected right down to the tree, so that property owners can have a conversation around how their property might be impacted. So that kind of data is, factual data that's going to wind up providing us with the potential of having good discussions. We will talk in a couple of weeks about how the city might be a good neighbor to to those property owners in Milford and Lawrence. We also have 2 new commissioners coming on board with tonight's agenda. We have 2 nominees from the county. They haven't had an opportunity to even be briefed on all of this. They certainly not just need to be briefed, but they also need to start to input their own thoughts and directions. We've talked about this. And so in terms of, and we're not knocking on doors at this point, essentially those conversations have come to a halt. So we are in a place potentially where we can be taking a breath, doing some fact finding, and then it's a case of how do we get there. So there, to Len's point, there's LiDAR and other measuring opportunities. There is grant money, as I understand it, available from the FAA. There's also the potential of our providing something that may not be FAA sanctioned, but does provide the property owners with some information that would be certainly useful to them and to this council in terms of knowing exactly what we're looking at relative to various properties' impact. And it also gives us some time to explore some options to be good neighbors around reconstituting some of these properties in a way that reimagines them to the with the property owners essentially taking the lead on that. So we had talked about that, and maybe I've kind of said all of it, but
Yeah.
let me just
And I'll
interrupt you
just,
anyway.
kind of answer that with that's exactly what the commission's on board with. The commission's is completely committed to coming up with with a collaborative solution for everybody. And it may require thinking outside of the scope of work as it's been presented to Passero. We're talking about it, we're working on it. I don't have the answer at this particular moment in time. We're working on it. We've got new commissioners coming. Everybody can expect an email from me in the next few days. I'll outline some of this, the things that we're working on, and I'm very optimistic on a path forward.
I'm just curious, sorry, I had my hand up. Isn't that us just putting more money or taking more money from FFA to go get, like, I understand it's been 3 years since we've had like a really decent scan done or whatever. Is this something we're agreeing to, like, as council, to put money into having a scan done, because it has to be updated? Like, because otherwise we're just putting more money into this thing.
It is the FAA, and certainly, but is there, is the value, does it outweigh your concerns?
Right. That's like, is it council feeling like they're in agreement to wanting that?
Are there any further questions for either our commissioner? Thank you so much for being here, Justin. Or the folks from Passero. I've been butchering your name now for like 8 months. I've been calling you Passero. But any further questions for anybody? Yes,
I just
Katie.
have one. So I'm putting myself back in the shoes of someone who owns an adjacent parcel, and air rights are granted, and 2 years down the line, a tree has been topped maybe, but not removed, and has grown back into the airspace. It needs to be mitigated again. What does that process look like? Do you set up an appointment? Does the city, I mean, do we have to do that, or can we just go and chop it down?
No,
Because
I think it would be an established process. I mean, the city would reach directly out to the landowner in conjunction with the airport commission, I would assume, saying, hey, we've identified, the FAA's identified obstruction, it's 1 tree, 2 trees, whatever the case is. Probably provide a graphic, with a point on there so they understand which tree it is, and then just, basically talk with them and say, all right, we're gonna hire a logger to come in on foot and drop that 1 tree, or it's gonna be a little bit larger operation, whatever. I mean, every situation is gonna be a little bit different, but of course, close communication, no one would just show up there like it's their own property.
Shannon.
Just out of curiosity, because you have been up there, how many trees would you say are up there were ones that we were supposed to be upkeeping that haven't been upkept? Because I've been around, and there's several, like, at least, I would say, a couple acres of trees where they were, like, maybe it was like 10 years ago they got taken, you know what I mean? They're just not being kept up with. So, like, were you identifying those as well?
Well,
Because,
from
like,
the
we have to
EA
understand the load that's coming to us for maintaining, you know what I'm saying? Like, I wanna understand better what load we are maintaining.
This might be the rationale for having aerial mapping.
One point that has occurred to me, the clear cutting has been talked about, and it's been a little bit confusing to me because nobody on our end is talking about clear cutting, so I've been wondering where the ideas come from, and I don't know, but possibly there has been clear cutting going on airport property appropriately, so as we're moving the weather station and we need to clear cut that, so I feel that there may be a perception of clear cutting based on what's going on the airport, but I want to reiterate that what's going on off the airport is a completely different project. It requires the easements, it requires the engineering, it requires all the environmental work that's in process, but it is completely separate as to what's going on the airport right now.
Maybe Matt could answer that. Yeah.
Well, we're not going to do that. So, folks, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Wait, Katie,
I would like Mr. Kent to answer that.
what?
I'm sorry.
I would like Mr. Kent to answer that question.
Yeah, I would like Mr. Kent to talk as well.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Passero is Passero, rather. Sorry. This is their presentation. I could see this becoming another 45 minutes. I would rather not do that.
That's the point of why I asked for a question and answer.
Appreciate that. All right, so thank you again, folks.
Welcome.
And
Thank you.
at this point, I'd like to break for 5 minutes for a restroom break. Okay?